I am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson number 7, Sunday, April 14th, 2024. The lesson is entitled Jesus' Authority Over Demons. Lesson text comes from Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29. Related scriptures are Matthew 17, 14 through 21, Luke 9, 37 through 42, Mark 5, 1 through 13, and Acts 8, 3 through 8. The place is possibly near Mount Hermon, and the time is 26 AD. Faith is one of the key words in our Christian life. We are saved by faith, Ephesians 2, 8 through 9, and we live by faith, 2 Corinthians 5, 7. While we have to exercise faith, we do not generate it within ourselves. It is a wonderful gift from God through His Spirit. Often our walk of faith is tested by trials that God allows to come our way. God designs these tests to grow and deepen our faith. James 1, 2 through 5. In this lesson, we look at a great test of faith. Today's aim, facts, to get a clearer picture of the role of faith in our daily Christian lives. Principle, to understand the power of faith in God to change situations. Application, to pray with greater confidence in the power of the Lord for a current struggle. Illustrating the lesson. We should pray with great confidence, knowing that all things are possible with God. Practical points. 1. Before we get into an argument, we should remember that we will answer to Jesus about it. Mark 9, 14 through 16. 2. God does not want excuses. He wants our faith. Verses 17 through 19. 3. We must never doubt God's ability to act, no matter what the odds are. Verses 20 through 23. 4. We do not need rock-solid faith. We just need faith in Jesus. Verse 24. 5. The work of God in our lives can be frightening, but it leads to lasting peace. Verses 25 through 27. 6. Where human strength fails, prayer avails. Verses 28 through 29. Golden text. Jesus said unto him, If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. Mark 9:23. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first, a needy son, Mark 9:14 through 20. The second is a believing father, Mark 9:21 through 24. And the third is a powerful Savior, Mark 9:25 through 29. Introduction. What would it have been like to be a student learning from the Son of God? It took Jesus' disciples a while to fully understand who he was, but throughout the process of learning, they were being mentored by the one who had been anticipated for centuries in Israel. One of the greatest privileges was given to Peter, James, and John while they were with Jesus at the Transformation, Mark 9, 1 through 13. It was the most glorious mountaintop experience they could possibly have had. God graciously gives us high points in our Christian walk. He knows we need the training that comes from painful situations, but he also knows the encouragement that comes from spiritually exhilarating times. We must realize that these are special blessings. A needy son, Mark 9:14. And when he came to his disciples, he saw a great multitude about them, and the scribes questioning with them. Verse 15. And straightway all the people, when they beheld him, were greatly amazed, and running to him saluted him. Verse 16. And he asked the scribes, What question ye with them? Verse 17. And one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. Verse 18. And wheresoever he taketh him, he teareth him, and he foameth and gnasheth with his teeth, and painteth away. And I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. Verse 19. And he answereth him and saith, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him unto me. Verse 20. And they brought him unto him, and when he saw him, straightway the spirit tear him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed foaming. A question for the scribes. Mark 9:14 through 16. Jesus, Peter, James, and John immediately faced the reality the other disciples had been trying to handle in their absence. It involved a problem that had arisen among the people who were around them, and it involved the power and workings of a demon in the young boy. This is the last exorcism that Mark recorded. The disciples' lack of glory in this story contrasts with Jesus' glory in the transfiguration. A large crowd of people surrounded the 9 disciples who were waiting for Jesus' return. Jesus and the 3 with him saw that there were arguments going on. The word translated questioning in verse 14 is the Greek word sezutio, and it indicates investigative discussion, that is, a dispute or controversy. Mark did not mention the subject of their discussion, nor did he explain why the people were amazed when they saw Jesus. The Greek term signifies that they were absolutely astonished. There is no reason to believe that Jesus had some type of visible glow left over him from the transfiguration experience, for he had specifically told his 3 companions not to tell anyone about the event. Verse 9. The people's amazement may have simply come from suddenly seeing Jesus drawing near, for they immediately ran to meet him. Jesus began by addressing the scribes with a question. Apparently, they had been the ones leading the arguments, not an unusual situation in which to find them. It is very likely that they had been watching the disciples and taunting them about their attempts to do something in which they were miserably failing. Jesus' question was direct. What question ye with them? Verse 16. It must have been extremely comforting to the disciples to have Jesus appear and immediately take up their cause in the conflict. A request from a father. Mark 9:17 through 18. Upon hearing Jesus' question, a man stepped up and explained his dilemma, which apparently was the focus of the dispute taking place. He said he had brought his son to Jesus to have him exorcise a demon that had robbed the boy of speech and hearing, verses 17 and 25. The demon was causing him to be self-destructive. This initial description given by the father sounds like epileptic convulsions, but it would soon become clear that the demon was causing more than this. The father described the boy as being seized by the demon and thrown to the ground, where he would foam at the mouth, gnash his teeth, and turn rigid, with plants pine away, meant to lose all moisture and thus become dried up and rigid. The father then explained that he had spoken to Jesus' disciples about helping him since Jesus himself was absent, but they had failed in their attempts. Jesus had previously given his disciples the power to cast out demons, Mark 3:15, 6, 7, 13. So it was not out of line that this father approached them when Jesus was not personally present. What caused them to be ineffective this time? Perhaps they were relying on their own power, thinking that since Jesus had given them this ability before, they could now do it again on their own. We need to understand that a sickness such as epilepsy or a condition like deafness does not automatically indicate demon possession. There have been people with epilepsy who have had well meaning acquaintances traumatize them by trying to cast demons out of them. This father was accurate in his diagnosis, but we must be careful not to draw premature conclusions about such symptoms when we see them in others. A rebuke for that generation, Mark 9:19 through 20. Jesus had given his disciples authority to cast out demons, Mark 6:7 and 13. And yet their ministry to the boy was ineffective. No wonder the Lord was grieved with them. How often he must be grieved with us when we fail to use the spiritual resources he has graciously given to his people. Jesus' words were biting and direct and were probably meant for everyone present, including the Father and the disciples. He had encountered so much unbelief that we can understand why he took such a direct tone. Later, he indicated that his disciples' faith was not strong in this incident. He expressed frustration over the fact that he was still encountering so much unbelief in everyone. How much more did he need to do and say to convince them about himself and his abilities? Nevertheless, Jesus would not let a needy boy go without help, so he asked that he be brought to him. When the boy saw him, the demon in him convulsed him and threw him to the ground immediately. When the evil spirit saw Jesus, it knew that its rule over the boy would soon end. The demon responded with one last attack, throwing the boy to the ground, showing its contempt for and rebellion against Jesus. Watch this demon demonstrate. It's as if the demon wants one more round of the child's play before the end, an exercise in futility, one final shudder of pitiful posturing. A believing father, verse 21. And he asked his father, how long is it ago since this came unto him? And he said, of a child, verse 22. And oft times it have cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Verse 23. Jesus said unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. Verse 24. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. An explanation about the son. Mark 9:21 through 22. Why did Jesus ask how long the boy had been afflicted? No doubt he did so for the sake of the father, who needed to acknowledge his desperate need for help from Jesus. Perhaps his faith had been shaken when Jesus' disciples were unable to do anything for his son when he thought they could. He had seen his son like this ever since early childhood, so it was indeed a seemingly impossible situation. Perhaps Jesus also asked the question for the benefit of the crowd, so they would know that only the power of God could help the boy. The description the father gave of what repeatedly happened to his son reveals that his condition was more than epilepsy. These were the destructive activities of a demon. From other gospel accounts, we know that such activity was a typical sign of demon possession. A demon's goal was the destruction of the person it inhabited. Mark 5:5. What was now stated by the father amplified what he had said earlier, 9:18. This boy was clearly at the mercy of indwelling demon. The father recognized that his son's problems were the work of the demon. His description of the demon's actions sound like something working on the boy from outside his own body. It was the demon that often threw him into the fire and water, and the father understood that it was trying to destroy him. He had probably been forced to rescue him many times. Although his faith had been shaken by the disciples' inability to help, he had an appeal to Jesus even in his doubt. The word if in verse 22 indicates his uncertainty. The man asked for compassion for his son. One of the encouraging truths we encounter in reading the Gospels is the regularity in which we read of Jesus' compassion upon needy people. We must never give up hope. A challenge to have faith. Mark 9:23 through 24. Jesus also used the word if in his response. Jesus took up the Father's words of doubt, if thou canst, to show that the point was not his ability to heal the boy, but the Father's ability to trust in God, who can do what is humanly impossible. It was not a question about Jesus' ability, but rather a question about the Father's belief in him and what he could do. Modern day faith healers often emphasize the necessity of having a certain amount of faith instead of drawing attention to the person who should be the object of their faith. Jesus did not say the Father did not have enough faith. He merely pointed out that he needed to believe in him. In any given situation, we do not need to summon up a certain amount of faith in order for God to respond to our needs. We need to strive to know our Father well enough to understand his ability to respond to those needs. The Father's response was immediate and strong. He declared his faith, but he also acknowledged that it was frail and needed to be built up. Instead of again calling Jesus Master, verse 17, he now called him Lord, verse 24. Most of us can identify with this man's assessment of himself. We have put our trust in God and believe he will provide and protect, but then we experience pangs of doubt when facing a difficult situation. We too then cry out, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. A powerful Savior. Verse 25. When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I charge thee, come out of him and enter no more into him. Verse 26. And the spirit cried out and rent him sore and came out of him, and he was as one dead, insomuch that many said, He is dead. Verse 27. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Verse 28. And when he was come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, Why could not we cast him out? Verse 29. And he said unto them, This kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. A demon's lack of power. Mark 9:25 through 27. Jesus never wanted to draw attention to himself just for the sake of attention. At this moment, many people were running to see what was going on, and he apparently sought to spare the Father any unneeded spectacle. So, without further delay, he commanded the demon to come out of the boy and never enter him again. His words were an authoritative charge. No demon could ever defy this. Once again, the demon reacted violently, convulsing the boy and letting out a shriek of rage. The wording of the text indicates an extreme spasmodic convulsion. We get the impression that the boy was violently thrashing around and screaming at the same time. This was happening as the demon was departing his body, and afterward he lay there looking as if he were dead. As the people gathered around, they concluded that he was indeed dead, for there was no longer any sign of life coming from him. But at that moment, Jesus calmly reached down and took his hand and helped him stand up. It appears that the demon had done its best to kill the boy, but it now became obvious that the power of Jesus was more than sufficient to overcome all such attempts. The boy's healing was complete. Not only was he free of the demon, but he also had full physical strength to stand and go on as normal. We can imagine the demon saying, "Ha, I left this kid like a corpse. Your move, Jesus." And as the crowd watched and the father winced at his son's stillness, Jesus took the boy's hand and brought him to his feet. An answer concerning the disciples' lack of power. Mark 9:28 through 29. Jesus and his disciples left the crowds of people and entered into the privacy of a house, where the perplexed disciples immediately asked why they had failed so miserably. What they had been unable to accomplish, Jesus had done with relative ease. Where were they lacking? The thing that must have bothered the disciples most was the fact that they had been given authority over unclean spirits, 6:7, and had been able to cast them out before, 6:13. Now, for some reason, they do not experience that same miracle power, but at least they go to the right person to find out why. Jesus answered, indicated indirectly that they had relied on themselves instead of on the power of God. This was also one of the more powerful demons. Matthew adds a further explanation by Jesus, "Because of your unbelief, for verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you." 17:20. If those who lived in Jesus' presence so constantly faltered in their belief, how much easier is it for us to falter? We must daily renew our trust in him. Questions. 1. What did Jesus and the 3 disciples encounter when they came from the mountain? 2. What happened when Jesus asked the scribes what they were discussing with the disciples? 3. How did the Father describe his son's actions, and to what did he attribute it? 4. What exasperated Jesus about the whole situation? 5. What happened when the first boy saw Jesus? 6. What seemed to have happened to the father's faith? Why? 7. How do we hear this in his request to Jesus? Mark 9:22. 8. Why did Jesus say, "If thou canst believe," to the Father? Verse 23. 9. What happened when Jesus commanded the demon to leave? 10. How did Jesus explain the disciples' inability to succeed? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, April 14th, 2024. Thank you for listening. God bless.